Hello my fellow 20-30 somethings. Quick primer on how to single pin pick a lock. I'll just run you through it real quick. So first thing is the basic anatomy of a pin tumbler lock, which is probably going to be the most available one to yourselves at the moment. You've got the body of the lock, you've got the plug, which is the bit that rotates in the middle. Inside you've got a spring and a stack, which is a driver pin, which is the top one here, and a key pin, which is the one that interacts with the key itself. And the space between these two pins is what you want to get lined up with what's known as the shear line, which is just basically the point where the plug and body of the lock meet each other. So a pin like this in between the body and plug will prevent it from turning. When that gap lines up, it'll allow it to turn. And what you're doing is you're taking your pick and you're manipulating those pins inside the lock to try and get that to line up. Now, obviously, a key does this all simultaneously. That allows the plug to turn and the lock to open. What you're trying to do is take advantage of some manufacturing tolerances and make that happen when it shouldn't happen. So the idea is you put a tension wrench inside your lock, which looks something like this. Typically that will go in the bottom of the lock and you'll apply some turning force. And the purpose of applying this turning force is to get the pins in here to bind up a little bit. And typically one pin will bind more solidly than the others. And your job is to find out which pin that is. Once you find out which pin it is, you're looking to lift that pin up until you feel a little bit of click, a little bit of feedback, at which point that pin should be locked between those two, between the gap there and the shear line, so it'll bind up in there, and then move on to the next pin that's binding, the next pin that's binding, the next pin that's binding. And this typically won't be from front to back or back to front, it'll be randomly one pin or the other. That order will be the same for that specific lock, but not necessarily for any other locks. So, for example here, we're going to take this lock, we're going to apply a little bit of force, and typically what I like to do is rest my pick on my middle finger. So when it goes into the lock, I can control the distance that goes in. And you can kind of feel your way along, and there we go, that's one. And we're just working our way through the lock. Wait until we find that one pin that binds. Now, if you're having difficulty finding the pin that binds, sometimes it's not a bad idea to add a little bit of tension here. If it's a case that all of them are binding, or you're getting too many pins, maybe 2 or 3 that are binding, to come back off on that a little bit and release some of the tension. Another problem that you might run into is oversetting, which is where you push this pin up so far that instead of the driver pin stopping the plug from rotating, you've pushed the key pin up into that gap, and that's prevented it from rotating. So delicate touch all the way. And yeah, I would start with the clear practice locks. With the clear practice lock, you will see the individual pin stacks through the side, and you'll be able to kind of visually see when the pin hits the shear line there. The gap between the two pins, hits the shear line, and get a feel for the feedback that you get on that. Do that a bunch of times. Do it without looking at the lock. And at that stage you should be able to pick a cylinder like this and move on to something a little more challenging. And as I said, offers open. Anyone who is interested in getting their hands on something like this, once you've got a little bit of confidence with the locks, let me know. I'll take a cheapo cylinder, I'll knock out the top part here and put in some grub screws. Basically you can use an Allen wrench to open each of these, stick in some new pins and springs. You can do it with just 2 pins, just 3 pins, and kind of work your way up in difficulty on the locks there. If you have any questions or you run into specific issues picking, give us a shout on the Discord group and let me know. I'm more than happy to help out. As always, pick responsibly, stay legal, Don't pick a lock you don't own. Don't pick a lock that's in use, because you could quite easily break it and prevent that lock from working. And nobody likes to be locked out of their own house by their own incompetence. Talk to you later.